My name is Yarom. I am Director of Economy and Growth at the Israeli National Cyber Directorate. My job is to deal with capacity building issues both in Israel and both with our many international partners. Now, to me, the title of the session implies urgency, supercharging. We all understand we need to do more, we need to do things faster, we need to enhance cybersecurity capacities in the institutional sense, legal sense, human sense, technical sense. Threats are only becoming bigger and more significant, and we need to keep pace. Now, this challenge isn't common only to developing countries, of course. It's not exclusive to the developing world. We are all struggling with it. Understanding what works, how to streamline our efforts to build capacities is a challenge we at the INCD look very keenly into. And this is why we collaborate with the Tel Aviv University and with our partners across the globe in trying to formulate better policies, more accurate, more streamlined, and more effective on how to build capacities. In order to discuss the challenges, the vision, the opportunities that the capacity building field offers us, we have a very exciting lineup of leaders who are at the forefront of this effort. We'll hear everything about it. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the floor the chairman of the Cyber Week conference, head of the Blavatnik Cybersecurity Research Center in Tel Aviv, and our close partner, Professor Itzik Ben Israel.
Thank you, Roy. I'll be very short. We all know that we live in the age of computers, if I speak from the technological point of view, age of information, but really it's about computers and communication between computers. And the more we become dependent on those computers, the more vulnerable we become to cyber attacks. Actually, cyber attacks are the dark side of computer technology. And one of the ways to survive in this new age is, of course, to be more resilient. And this is more or less the subject of our session today. And let me take this opportunity to announce that Tel Aviv University with ICRC, the Blavatnik Interdisciplinary Cyber Research Center, are going to inaugurate the Regional Cyber Resilience Center, together with, of course, the Ministry of Regional Cooperation and INCD, the Israel National Cyber Directorate. We are going to be involved in major applied research initiative that will benefit the region, including the Mediterranean, around the Mediterranean Sea, and the Gulf states. And I believe that we may develop innovative and cost-effective methods to provide knowledge and expertise to support the regional digital transformation. I hope we will have a fruitful discussion, and I hope to see you, all of you, also tomorrow and the day after tomorrow in the other sessions that we have in this Cyber Week. Thank you all.
Thank you, Itzik. And now I have the distinct pleasure to give the floor to my boss, Yigal Unna, the Director General of the Israeli National Cyber Directorate. Yigal, please.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, everybody. Professor Ben Israel. Yeah, still excited from the renewal of the great tradition of the Cyber Week after 1 year of a little hold down by the COVID-19, and still waiting for the other physical events coming up tomorrow and Wednesday on its special week. When we talk about capacity building, well, Israel has some experience, a pretty good experience in understanding and combining between all the elements that are crucial to the success of a strong cyber power. And that means working together hand by hand, academia and industry, and bringing the human capital to a close and prosperous interconnected ecosystem that brings value to each part of it. And none of this cannot be achieved unless working with international partners. And when we see the World Bank, the Latin America Development Bank, and other forums that we work, of course, with the Blavatnik ICRC in Tel Aviv University. This is the only way we realized we can get a higher level of understanding, of knowledge, of know-how, of even being attractive to young people, talented people that looking for their career path, and we want to attract them to cybersecurity, which has its own merits by itself, but it won't get anywhere unless we hold hands and pave the way with all these partners. And partnership is the name of the game, I think, in the modern world. In cybersecurity, it's not a nice to have, it's a must have, and we cannot work without. So I want to thank all of you, the OES and the Gates Foundation and the IADB and the World Bank, of course, all the great members and friends that are taking part in getting the world little, maybe even more than little, a more safer place for us all regarding the digital and digitalization or digital transformation that we all walking through or running through these days by holding hands and working together, governments, public sector, private sector. This is the only way we can achieve it, and we're going to continue to do that, the government of Israel, hand by hand with the others. So thank you, and enjoy the great Cyber Week coming again and here to stay. Thank you.
Thank you, Yigal. Meanwhile, while we await our first keynote speaker, I'd like to mention that you are supposed to be able to use the chat in order to ask questions where I can refer them later to the speakers. So feel free to utilize this option. Our next speaker, our next and first keynote speech will be delivered by Edward Su, who is a senior advisor for disruptive technologies at the Digital Development Global Practice with the World Bank. Now, Edward Su his role includes supporting mainstreaming of digital and disruptive technologies across the World Bank and developing partnerships with global strategic technology companies. He has a very diverse background, a very rich background, both in the World Bank and other financial institutions, both private and in the development community. And he will be speaking with us on the vision of the World Bank regarding cybersecurity capacity building in the near future. Please, Mr. Su.
Yes, hello. I wanted to make sure everybody can see my screen.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Roy, and very glad to be here to speak with all of you today. And I just wanted to start with a little bit first setting the context for what is happening in developing countries. And when we say developing countries, we mean middle income or lower income countries. And I wanted to start with a little bit on what is happening with digital transformation. How does that relate to economic development? And then really that leads into why is cybersecurity so important? And if we don't address cybersecurity and cyber resilience, how this will really slow down economic development and progress for these countries. So let me just start with first, what is the World Bank Group? What do we do? And our mission is to end extreme poverty and to promote shared prosperity. We're one of the largest sources of development finance in the world. This past year, we did over $45 billion of financial assistance. We do over 12,000 projects, and we have 189 member countries. And what is our main mission? Why do we talk about ending extreme poverty? Well, one of our goals is to reduce the number of people living in extreme poverty. And when we say extreme poverty, we mean those living who earn less than $1.90 a day in US dollar terms. We want to get that to as low as possible. Our goal was to get that to under 3%. Right now, it was the last numbers we have. We estimated there were about 643 million still live in extreme poverty. That's about 10% in the world. And here, this graph just shows that because of COVID, this number is going to increase even more. So the only reason I put this here is that to stress the urgency of the task before us, that there's still a very, very large number of the world today that live in very, very extreme poverty conditions. You can imagine $1.90 a day is very little to make your life livable. So as we discussed a bit, digital transformation is increasingly central to economic development. And what we've seen now is that across all of the sectors, digital transformation is critical towards driving economic growth, towards creating jobs, creating a competitive economy. Some of the numbers that we looked at the World Bank was that when you have a 10% increase in broadband penetration, it increases your GDP between 1.5 and 2.5% in developing countries. This is very large. We also did a report with Google recently where we looked at what is the size of Africa's internet economy. And we saw it has a potential to reach 180 billion by 2025. And just as we've talked about, we all know COVID-19 has given the digital agenda added importance. We saw that global mobile network traffic grew 50% over, during the pandemic. So governments, businesses got very much more engaged. And we saw this was especially important for governments to continue the delivery of essential services. And I'm going to come back to that as to why that's so important and what are the risks of cyber attacks on these essential services. And also we saw that there was a huge increase in how individuals were interacting with the internet, particularly in developing countries. And so, for example, we saw growth in e-commerce delivery that gained 10 years in 8 weeks, basically, of what we expected of that growth. So what is the World Bank doing? We're working to address these digital divides. Even though we see how important digital transformation is, half of the world's population remains unconnected, don't have access to broadband. Even within these countries that do have some broadband, the rural areas, those who live in the countryside, don't have good access. We also see a large gender digital divide where women are 20% less likely to use internet than men. Affordability remains a major barrier. Uneven distribution of digital skills. I'm going to come back to this as one of the major barriers actually for cybersecurity and resilience. And we see disruptive technologies really also a gap between the developed countries and developing countries in their access. And World Bank, we have projects and we're working to address all of these in order to meet our mission of reducing extreme poverty and increasing shared prosperity, as I mentioned. And just as a kind of a taste of how do we work with countries? So we typically work with governments on their national digital transformation approaches. Here are just some examples. We're working with Ethiopia on a digital foundations project that looks at both the telecom sector, how to improve quality coverage, how to create new digital jobs. Within the Caribbean, how to create a better enabling environment for digital businesses, for platform services, again, on digital skills, and working all around the world in this, in Middle East, North Africa, and within Africa as well. So why is cybersecurity important to development? So as we've seen, the process now of digitalization in developing countries is bringing with it increased cybersecurity risk. We all know that, as we get more of the developing world online, you're going to see much more increase in use, but increase in the number of devices and a much more increase in the number of surfaces in which will be vulnerable to cyber attacks. We see that this is not something for the future. This is something happening now, that ransomware attacks have been seen throughout the developing world. And you can see just from these maps that Countries like Vietnam, India, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Ukraine. These are all developing countries and are targets of ransomware attacks. And the WannaCry attack also demonstrates the vulnerability of the developing world, in which when you look at this map, you see all over Asia, Africa, Latin America, all were affected by these ransomware attacks. So I want to touch a bit upon what is the impact of cyber attacks on development. And it goes beyond just short-term financial or economic loss. Here we have 6 factors. We all know about economic loss, direct financial payments from ransomware, loss of business, repairs. National security is an issue. Privacy in developing countries, I think, is more and more of a concern when you have the number of healthcare records or the types of records that are being compromised. I talked a bit about service delivery, the disruption of critical government services, financial systems, infrastructure, healthcare. Reputation of the government in these countries is quite important, and depending upon the context. And then the final one is trust. And when you have cybersecurity attacks, it really undermines citizen trust and digital transformation. And what's really worrisome about that is that it slows down this whole process of digitization that I had talked about. That we know how important it is for these countries to transition to a digital economy. Many of them are not there yet. But when you have cyber attacks, when you have ransomware attacks, when you have privacy records being exposed, this really undermines the confidence of both the government and the people in those countries to want to embark on the digital transformation process. And so this is another big impact we see. I'm going to spend a little bit of time just getting a bit more deeper into some of these impacts. So we talked a bit about the financial cost. I think the thing I want to highlight here is you can see that in Africa, we estimated the estimated cost of cybercrime was $3.5 billion. We see some news headlines here in Vietnam costing $902 million. And I just want to highlight here that the cost in these developing countries is very high compared to their GDP per capita, compared to the amount of resources the government has to provide other essential government services. So when you have these type of attacks, the financial cost, of course, in developed countries is very significant, but in developing countries, it hits even harder. And I'll come back to that point. I also wanted to talk a bit more about service delivery. And here in the healthcare sector, we saw that in South Africa and Botswana, there was an attack on Life Healthcare, which oversees 49 hospitals, for example. This is actually a client that the World Bank Group supports through its private sector arm. And it suffered an attack that affected its admission system, business process systems, email servers. And these are countries in developing world that don't have good healthcare systems. And so when you have an attack on a hospital, when you have these kinds of issues, it really makes people avoid the healthcare system, and this is very worrisome in a time of a pandemic when you need to establish trust in the healthcare system. And in the energy sector, we had again in South Africa, the utility servers were hacked. In Ukraine, we had an attack that cost $2.7 million per day. So we see that. Again, in developing world, you have the energy system is not as advanced as in other countries. And so when you have an attack and it disrupts the energy systems, this really has other knock-on effects upon many other businesses that are relying upon stable electricity. In the financial sector, what was very worrisome in Uganda, we saw that when hackers breached the mobile money system and transferred 3.2 million away. These are people who are relying on mobile money and typically are very poor. So when you have this takes away a large share of their income. And again, really defeats the mission of trying to end extreme poverty, as I talked about before. So here, this is again, coming back to how cyber attacks are eroding trust in digital. This was a survey done by UNCTAD, which shows that this is a really concern in developing countries. You can see Latin America, Middle East, and Africa, that there's more concern even than in developing countries on internet security and trust. And the concern about cybersecurity, what's interesting about this survey is that the concern about cybersecurity is actually highest in developing countries, more than even developed countries. So just a couple numbers from the region. One of the numbers I want to highlight is that when you look at the skills gap within Middle East and North Africa, you see there's a personnel gap of over 100,000 certified cyber professionals that are needed to address cyber attacks, cyber resilience. And here we also saw that in the MENA region, the average incident loss in region was 6.5 million compared to 3.9 million globally. So you see these are even more extensive financial impacts than in developed countries. And then moving just to LAC, the Latin America region, again, there's a forecast deficit of 1.5 million cyber professionals in 2020. And you can see that the cost of cyber crime was 90 billion a year, and that's nearly 1.6% of the region's GDP. So finally, on the impact of cybersecurity, I just want to highlight, it also is really impacting our ability to deliver on our COVID vaccine programs. Much of how we're planning to deliver the COVID vaccine programs, or how the programs we're supporting, rely on digital systems to manage supply chain, manage the cold chain, manage the records, the pre-registration, monitoring certificates. And this is very now exposed to cybersecurity risk, and increasing the resilience of these vaccine programs is now top of mind at the World Bank. So let me just finish up the presentation with just talking a bit about how is the World Bank supporting developing countries in cybersecurity. We talked about the motivation of why we're doing it, how its effect on economic development, and now what are we going to do? What are we trying to do? And so there are a few different areas. First, on our direct operation side, so we support countries directly in cybersecurity. First, we do a variety of diagnostics for countries, and I'll come back to this. Second, we work with them on their legislative and regulatory frameworks, their policy and strategy frameworks, to think about, as we look at what are their financial regulations, what are their energy regulations, what are their data regulations, how do these impact their cyber resilience? We also work on strengthening institutions by supporting their cyber agencies, and do a bunch of capacity building and training. And now we're starting to get also into, when we support direct projects, whether it's in the energy sector, healthcare sector, transport sector, also building in cyber resilience into those projects. I'll talk a bit more about that. Finally, we also do the knowledge agenda. This is analytics and capacity building. And here we do a variety of different global knowledge reports where we look at, first other big topics like data, cloud computing, broadband, and we discuss what is the importance of cybersecurity, what do we know about it, and what can countries do about it. And finally, we also work a lot on partnerships. And I think someone else mentioned earlier just how important it is to work together with others, given that this is a cross-border problem, a global problem. And so we're actively working to get the best knowledge, get the best tools from many of those who are on this panel as well, and disseminate that to our client countries. I talked a bit about the diagnostics that we are doing. And so, at the national level, we have a couple, I just want to highlight 3 different areas that we're working. First, at the national level, we have something called the Digital Economy Framework. And this is, as I mentioned to you before, just how important digital transformation is to a country's economic development. So oftentimes when we go into a country, we analyze what are the foundations of the digital economy, not just broadband, but also skills, the level of financial payments, digital financial payments, the level of venture capital, the level of digital platforms. And we look at what is happening, what are the priority areas for that country to work on to improve that digital economy. And now, as part of that analysis, we're starting to include how can a country think about embedding cyber resilience across all of those foundations of the digital economy. The second area, we also support the cybersecurity capacity and maturity model that's supported by Oxford. And we're doing a variety of different assessments within different countries, and then using those assessments to think about how can we better support the country to address some of the gaps that we find. And also some thematic assessments. We have our own cybercrime assessment tool we developed. And finally, I just want to mention this last area. We're developing a critical information infrastructure protection toolkit. And this is designed to be used at the sectoral level. And we're piloting it in some big energy projects, as well as big financial sector projects. And the idea is, as we work on an energy project for a country where we are supporting, we might have a a $200 or $300 million that's supporting the construction of energy grid, utilities, also supporting the enabling environment around it, the policies. Also systematically looking at what are the vulnerabilities from a cyber resilience perspective, not just at the government level, but across all of the stakeholders, all of those who are involved in that sector, and trying to bring that into the energy project or the health project or the financial sector project, and make sure we address the cyber resilience upfront from a sectoral level. And so you not only have the national government engaged in looking at, how can they support cyber resilience, but also the energy ministry really keyed in, understanding what are the vulnerabilities that they have within the energy sector, and then the World Bank coming in with our financing to really support the capacity building or whatever else that is needed to address the cyber risk. And I think we're just seeing huge demand from our clients because they understand that this is going to be a real, one of their top risks that is growing over time. And so finally, what are we doing going forward? We're actively working with international partners. We've established a new cybersecurity multi-donor trust fund. This is something where we've raised money to work with, to support our clients on these issues. We're very pleased to have our donors, such as Estonia, Germany, the Netherlands, come and support us. And we're also continuing to work with other international partnerships and donor organizations like those on this panel as well. So let me stop there, and very glad to be a part of this effort and to be here today.
Thank you very much, Ed, for this enlightening presentation. Could I ask you a follow-up question? What role can the participants at CyberPeace play to improve cyber resilience in developing countries? We have here representatives from government, private entities, NGOs, academia. What can we do, all of us?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One, we've actually been working with technology companies quite a bit, whether it's Google and Microsoft, who are part of our digital development partnership. And what we've talked with them a lot around is that many of the technology solutions that they develop are designed for the developed world. They're designed for the US, for Europe. And they don't really pay much attention to the problems or the context within the developing countries. And the context there is quite different. The systems they use are different. The type of capacity they have is quite different. So the type of usage by consumers is quite different. The way individuals are interacting with the internet is quite different. So first, I want to encourage everybody, all the participants, to really look at the developing countries, look at their context, look at the issues, and really see if you can design your technology to address these issues. And not just because it's important for development, not just because it's important to reach these goals of ending extreme poverty, but it is also a big potential business opportunity as well. That if we can have better products, if we can have better technology solutions designed to for these countries, I think like I was saying before, our clients are expressing just huge demand to want more solutions. So that's the first thing I would say. And also here at the World Bank, we're looking for more partners. We need a lot more expertise. We need a lot more technical support. So anybody who wants to work with the World Bank, very happy to have a discussion with them as well.
Absolutely. Finally, what will you describe as the greatest obstacle facing the World Bank as the most significant development bank in the world in supporting cyber resilience in developing countries?
Yeah, I would say I touched upon this previously, but really the issue of capacity, where you have, estimated 100,000 professionals needed in Africa, 1.5 million in Latin America. And we, even within the World Bank, ourselves, we don't have much capacity to understand, many of these issues. This is a very fast moving topic. So I think this issue of skilling, of expertise, both within the World Bank, within our clients, within our partners, is the biggest challenge. And that's why we're so keen, to work with partners, to bring in the best expertise that is around the world, bring it inside the World Bank, bring it into our clients. So the more that we can partner with others on this capacity building, the more we can address, the capacity gaps within governments, within also private sector in these countries. I think that's probably the number one issue that we need to resolve today.
Thank you very much, Ed, for your most enlightening presentation. Glad to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Next, our second keynote speaker, Mr. Chris Painter, who needs no introduction, but I'll do it anyway. He's currently president of the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, the GFC, the foundation of the GFC. He's been at the vanguard of cyber issues and policy for almost 30 years, filling various positions, senior positions in the US government, with the last of which I believe is commonly known as the world's first cyber diplomat in the US Department of State. Mr. Painter, please.
Thanks, and it's great to be with you. Sadly, virtually this year, but hopefully in person next year. And it's always a pleasure to participate in this meeting. So I want to build on what my colleague from the World Bank talked about. Capacity building, cybersecurity capacity building, in my view, is foundational to all the good things we're trying to achieve in cyberspace, whether it be digital growth or digital economies, and also muting or combating all the bad things, all the challenges we see in cyberspace. And capacity building is something I think is important, not just for developing countries, but also for developed countries. They can learn from each other. There's things that all of us need to understand and do. Now, what I found particularly, and I very much like the presentation we just heard because it talked about the actual impact on developing countries in terms of their economies and their growth, which I think is important as we look at this issue. Because for too long, I've seen cybersecurity writ large, but certainly capacity building being treated as a kind of a boutique issue, not as a core issue of our national and economic security. And I hope that's changing because I think we need to think about this area as a whole as a core issue of our politics, of our priorities, of our economic futures, of our national security futures. And cyber capacity building really is foundational to all of that. I participated in some of the sessions of the two big UN meetings that happened recently. One, the UN group of governmental experts, where we were allowed to participate in some of the meetings as non-government stakeholders, and also the UN group of governmental experts, where although we didn't participate, the report came out recently. Both of those reports, I mean, first of all, in the UNGGE, Open-Ended Working Group, which is all 195 countries, it was telling how many countries raised again and again the importance of capacity building, particularly in the developing world, but really across the board. And that's really shows you how foundational this is. And again, in the report, both of the Open-Ended Working Group and the group of governmental experts, capacity building was highlighted. Indeed, in the group of governmental experts report, which is a bit more detailed, it says the group underscores the importance of cooperation and assistance in the area of ICT security and capacity building and their importance to all elements of that group's mandate. Increased cooperation along more effective assistance and capacity building in the area of ICT security involving other stakeholders, meaning not just government stakeholders, such as the private sector, academia, and civil society, and the technical community, can help states apply the framework for responsible behavior of states in their use of ICTs. They help bridge critical gaps and critical divides, and they allow states to, they can strengthen states' capacity to detect, investigate, and respond to threats and ensure that all states have the capacity to respond, to responsibly use ICTs. So this was featured in that report, and they go into a lot more detail about what capacity building means, and I think that's critical. My group, the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, which was mentioned by our World Bank colleague, has been around now for 6.5 years. It was formed to make sure we're coordinating cybersecurity capacity building more thoroughly around the world, to make sure our very limited resources in this area, and they are unfortunately too limited, are used in an effective way, and that we coordinate among all the different donors, implementers, and countries who need help. The GFC has been broken up into in 5 working groups that deal with different aspects of cybersecurity capacity building, and I hope really implement what the UN and other bodies have been talking about. One is on national strategies and policies. That includes every country should have a national cybersecurity strategy. It's foundational to some of their other efforts. But also we have a task force on norms, diplomacy, international law, and confidence building measures in this space. And that really, every country needs to be part of those discussions, so that helps that along. We have a second working group that deals with incident response and CSIRTs, cybersecurity incident response teams, and helping countries build that, and works on how we protect critical infrastructure. We have a working group on standards. We have a working group on cybercrime. We have a working group on skills, awareness, training, et cetera. So all these are core elements of capacity building. We have more than 140 members and partners, which include over 60 countries, international organizations, including one of our partners is the World Bank, but also the ITU and other organizations around the world. We have academia, we have civil society, and we have a number of corporate members too, which is really important, and work with institutions including the World Economic Forum, the CyberPeace Institute, which you'll hear about in a bit, and in other forums across the world. And it's very international. We have members from all over the world. And so it's multi-stakeholder, it's international, and really its mission, as I said, has been to promote capacity building as a subject, but also to help coordinate it. Those working groups have been busy doing exactly that. Our 3 main lines of activity, and I should note that our website is www.thegfce.org. So I encourage all of you to go and look at that website that talks about all our activities. We have a portal called the Sybil portal, which collects all the best practices, reports, and tools that we've been able to generate both within the GFC and from other parties. So that's open to everyone, and I recommend you look at that. We have a global research agenda where we identify gaps in these different areas and try to fill them through research and commissioning more work. And then we have really what I think is our core function, which is the matchmaker function, where we take countries who need help and we try to match them with the right resources, civil society, implementers, funders, et cetera. So for instance, a country says, I need a national strategy, and we can link them to a group of different members and partners of the GFC, can help them and then make sure that gets carried out over time. So that's been very successful, but we're trying to build on that in the coming years and expand our membership, expand our regional presence. We're working to create a hub in the Pacific. We've been working with the OAS in the Americas region. We worked with ASEAN, we've worked with the EU. We're working really everywhere we can to have this global presence. And we've been most recently doing quite a bit of work in Africa, including through the generous support of the Gates Foundation and also from Microsoft, establishing an Africa project that really looks at not just finances, but financial issues, but beyond that, to try to build capacity in Africa, which is a critical need. So it's a community. It's a bottom-up driven community that I think has been very successful in the past, but we really need to be even more successful going forward. Just like capacity building writ large needs to be more focused, more resourced. I view capacity building as being an undergirder of all the UN development goals. This came up a little bit in the last presentation. Everything we're trying to achieve, both physically and online, capacity building is a key part of. And I'd like it to be thought of as part of those development goals or as foundational to those development goals. Unfortunately, one of the challenges we have, and it is unfortunate, is that the resources are slim. And even though this has gotten to be a more important topic with some of the cyber attacks we've seen and intrusions, and because of COVID and how reliant we are on these topics, we don't, I think, have the resources we need. So certainly we have a good partner in the World Bank, but we need more. And so I encourage those countries, those people listening, those institutions who are interested in this topic, that this is a collective effort that I think is incredibly important going forward to make sure we make progress. We can't have countries who are languishing behind. We can't have them essentially being the weakest link here. They want assistance, they need assistance, and it helps not just those countries, but it helps all of us. So I encourage all of you to become involved in our efforts to work with us collectively to advance capacity building as a bigger issue on the world stage, and for us really to make progress, which there's a huge amount of progress to be made. We've done a lot of good things so far, but that's really not enough yet because there's so much more that needs to be happening. And as I said, even in countries who are cyber savvy, they may be working on their second, their third, their fourth national strategy. They can learn too from talking to others. The community, I think, is a very important aspect of this. So I look forward to the future. I look forward to working with all of you. I look forward to seeing my friends in Israel again and working with you as well. And I think this is going to be an endeavor that's going to really be important to all of our efforts going forward. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Chris. Can I ask you, you mentioned that resources are slow to coming by, and although the issue is obviously important and gaining importance, is not prioritized enough. What can we do, governments or non-government entities, what can we do to raise and prioritize this issue more than it is now?
Well, I think often in higher level of governments, and this has been my experience, or higher levels of companies too, like the CEO level or the C-suite level, or at the ministerial level of governments, and maybe Israel's a little exception to this, but most governments, cyber is seen as this kind of boutique-y technical issue and not a core issue that they need to deal with. And hopefully the last couple of years has changed that. And some of the big, the big events we've seen in cyberspace, including ransomware and the cybercrime around ransomware, whether that's state-sponsored or not, the fact that affects critical infrastructure and healthcare systems in Ireland and other things around the world, that should give people a lot of pause and pay attention to this issue. So I think it's incumbent on all of us. This is a great forum, but we're mostly cyber people, right? And cyber people are great, but we need to reach out to get the people who don't deal with cyber every day involved and dedicated to this. So I think it's pushing more on an open door, given all the events that have happened. U.S. is certainly paying more attention to this, and many other countries are. But we need to continue to do that. And then the second part of that is to say, look, if we're going to have these strong systems around the world, if we're going to combat these threats, we need to invest in this, and we need to invest in capacity building. So I don't pretend this is going to happen overnight, but we need sustained efforts of all the people in meetings like this and to reach out beyond our groups to get other people involved.
Thank you. Finally, how do you view the role of let's say the private sector in the efforts of capacity building, as you talked just now about what governments can do and how they can lead the charge? How do you see the role of the private sector?
So I think this is a unique area. There's always been debate, and there certainly has been in the UN, about what's the role of the private sector and other stakeholders in negotiating norms, for instance. Now, I think they have a role, but some countries don't. But on capacity building, this is an area where all countries have come together and said, yes, other stakeholders have a role. And I think the private sector plays a huge role in this, not only because they can help resource this, they can help fund some of this, and I think that that's important, and we've seen some of that, but they have capabilities, they have real world experience. In GFC, as I said, Microsoft has been a key player, Symantec's been a key player. We've had Palo Alto Networks they have a training academy, so they've brought some of the awareness to it. We need to partner with the private sector, and they need to see it as a priority too, not just the traditional cyber private sector, but beyond that. So I think they have a huge role to play, and I think it benefits all of us to have those partnerships and to make sure that we're working with the private sector to do this. They have their own interests, which are furthered also by doing capacity building, because these, especially developing countries, are emerging markets, and if they're more secure, it helps them too. So I think we have a common interest, and we can make progress here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Painter, for another enlightening keynote presentation. Thank you very much. Please stay with us.
Thanks. Happy to be with you.
Thank you. We'll be moving on now to our panel. We have 5 very unique and diverse panelists. And I'd like to remind you to use the option to ask questions yourselves using the questions tab on the broadcasting website. And without further ado, I'd like to invite my friend, Miguel Porrua, who is a coordinator of data and digital government cluster at the Inter-American Developing Bank. On a personal note, has been our partner of the INCD for the last 5 years, 6 years. Is he online, Miguel? Yes, here you are.
Here I am.
Good to see you.
Right, right. So am I ready to go? Is it my...
Yes, I just finished presenting you and you are okay to go.
Excellent. Excellent. So, well, good morning. Good day since people are in different places of the world. Let me start by thanking several organizers for the kind invitation. The Blavatnik Interdisciplinary Center, the Yuval Workshop for Science, Technology and Security at Tel Aviv University, the Israel National Cyber Directorate, thank you, Roy, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for giving the Inter-American Development Bank the chance to be part of this Cyber Week 2021, and for me personally to be part of this exchange. I have 5 minutes, so the context on the situation of cybersecurity in the region where the bank works, and then I'll do the progress to the new cybersecurity capability model. The bank, the ID, abbreviated way, has a new administration, a new president, and 2025, where digitization 5 pillars, and cybersecurity is an important component of that new vision. This is important for the upcoming years. And some of you know that the bank has been very active in doing research itself, just to picture the panorama of cybersecurity in the region. And part of that research is illustrated in the cybersecurity report that we launched in partnership with the Organization of American States, the OAS, that we work together with. And let me give you some highlights of what we saw through that research. We work the Latin American and Caribbean countries, most of the countries you can think of in the region. And the reality is concerning. There's just 14 countries out of the 26 that have a community emergency response system team, a CERT. There's just 10 of them that have a national body that coordinates cybersecurity in the country, 10 out of 26. There's just 7 of them, 7 out of 26 that just had a critical infrastructure protection plan, just to give you an idea. And that is against a backdrop of a region where cyber attacks is growing, as everywhere else in the world. And let me mention just a couple of electrical companies in 2 different places of Brazil last year. Big amount of money in ransomware and disrupting. So that is the reality. Like before I go to the human talent gap. This is the ICRC report that mentions that the region has a talent gap in cybersecurity, a gap in to the tune of 500,000 people, 530,000 exactly as of today, professionals that are missing in cybersecurity. I know it's a worldwide problem, but I think it's even exacerbated in Latin America and the Caribbean region. From the bank side, we're doing a big effort in training human resources, and for that purpose, it's been a great partner. We've been doing activities for several years on site in Israel when COVID was not an obstacle, and lately more online. Several workshops where we train policy makers. Now we're using significantly, and we have a MOOC online that has trained 40,000 professionals in the region so far. But probably our strongest tool to push the cybersecurity own operations. Just to give you a quick view of what we're doing to push that agenda and to strengthen capabilities in the country, since, as Chris Painter mentioned previously, cybersecurity globally will be as strong as the weakest country in the world. So let me go to progress, which, by the way, has a very nice, inviting name. The acronym sounds very good. That has been very helpful for us, for the IDB, and to manage our agenda in the region. It is a great addition to what we're doing right now, because So, Roy, do you start or I continue?
Well, I'm trying to confirm that everyone is seeing us right now.
Okay.
Let me get confirmation from someone and then you can begin. Yes.
Yes.
Please begin.
Thank you, Roy. Let me ask for apologies for the disruption. What it looks like a technical problem. I think Roy was telling me that it's a trick to be sure that everyone keeps focus on the activity, right? Roy, let me continue where I left off. I was starting to address the progress report, and I mentioned that I like the acronyms. It is good and inviting. Progress. It sounds really great. And my reflections are kind of 3-4 quick ones, because I don't want to delay too much the exchange with the rest of the panelists. As I mentioned, we focus on national policies, which are key to advance cybersecurity in the countries where we work with, but we don't have a tool for sectoral, for the sectoral address of cybersecurity, which means that this is a very much welcome tool. And I was highlighting 3 or 4 characteristics that I think are going to make it valuable. One is the fact that it focuses on gaps. For us at the IDB, it's important to have clear messages to those that we work with about what are the gaps, what are they missing to strengthen their cybersecurity policies. The second thing that I would like to highlight is that it focuses on action. And it has on actionable activities, and it has a clear methodology for that. Those 3 steps, assessment, design, guidance, is of great value for an institution like the IDB, for instance, that helps and works side by side with the countries to progress in cybersecurity. And finally, the 5 dimensions, the organization, process, people, tools, and compliance, goes very well along the lines of the frameworks that the bank, the IDB, uses to work in general in the digital agenda. So I think this is going to be a great contribution to the cybersecurity policy design and implementation. I would like just to call the attention of all institutions that are going to work in reviewing the methodology and applying it to focus not just on the results of the cybersecurity policies at sectoral level, but also on the capabilities. We as a multilateral organization are interested in building capabilities beyond what needs to be done year 1 or year 2. I mean, living in the country, enough capacity to manage and design their own cybersecurity policies and initiatives. And having said that, Roy, let me thank the government of Israel, all institutions for the support we have received at the Inter-American Development Bank in the past years, and in particular to the INCD, Roy, for the technical support that you have provided the bank and the countries in the region on cybersecurity. The bank is ready to contribute and to help to spread this methodology and to be sure that we help the countries, in this case at the sectoral level, to address their cybersecurity needs. Thank you so much, and I remain attentive to questions or needs of additional information.
Thank you very much, Miguel. Always a pleasure, and let me return the thanks and thanking you for this long and beneficial partnership. It's been a pleasure, and I'm sure it will continue to be a pleasure. And please stay with us. I'd like to invite our next panelist, Mr. Stéphane Duguin, who is CEO of CyberPeace, the CyberPeace Institutes. Mr. Duguin, are you with us? Hi. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good.
I just introduced you, please.
So I'm not sure that you can hear me. I got kind of an echo, but I guess it's okay. So I will go with, I saw you nodding, so I think it's good.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to be here. So Stéphane Duguin, I'm the CEO of the CyberPeace Institute, based in Geneva, non-profit organization. And it's a pleasure today to discuss about capacity building. I followed with quite great interest the previous speakers, and I would like to build upon what has been said before. In fact, especially to Chris' point, saying that cyber capacity building has to be seen as critical and core to any ambitious cyber strategy and whatever type of cyber you look into, from security and to us for our focus of the CyberPeace Institute to CyberPeace. So the way we are looking at CyberPeace is really a state where human security, human dignity, and human equity can exist in cyberspace. In fact, if you think of it, I mean, the security and the dignity and equity, all of it is in need of capacity building. So to us, this is something very important to the mission of the Institute. How practically have we seen this evolving over the past year? I think it's good to go into practical example, is notably through a program, Cyber for Healthcare, that we launched last year when the pandemic was on the rise. Cyber for Healthcare is a capacity building program, in fact, where we could outreach potential beneficiaries, meaning non-for-profit. We service vulnerable communities, and among them, the priority is NGOs or non-for-profit. In this case, non-for-profits who were active in fighting COVID. And we looked into what would be their needs when it comes to capacity building. And we could match their needs with the capacity of private industry in willingness, capability to help for free these non-for-profit in need. What did we learn is that there's a common difficulty in capacity building if you go with grassroots practitioners, which means a lack of sustainability, the lack of resources, first to ask for help. Asking for help is, and we forget too much about this, is costing resources. The simple fact that you need to have someone in-house that understands the problem is going to commit time to express help, and is going to commit time to receive the help that can be provided even for free. And also sustainability, that what is providing in some various transactions, you help, you build capacity, is just not lost after weeks or after months when programs fade out, resources fade out, budgets fade out. So we identified this in the context of cyber for healthcare, and that's why we decided to launch, in fact, it was just last week, as a pilot project in Geneva, program called CyberPeace Builders, which is a program with cyber volunteers. That's clearly what it is, where we as a CyberPeace Institute negotiate with corporations, so private sector, for them to provide capacity, time of people for free. Very few days a year, but it's there, it's volunteering. And we, on the other hand, make sure that we engage with beneficiaries in order to propose to them quite ambitious project to build up capacity for NGOs, vulnerable communities. So something that helps them also to engage in program of corporate social responsibilities. Still the same finding in this program, it costs resources to seek for help. The trust factor is very important. You don't accept help from anyone. So it's not just that because help is out there that is going to be practical. There's immense resources. In fact, today, if you want to seek for help and look for cyber capacity program, like it was mentioned by the GFC before, the CBIL portal that are there. But on top of that, you need to have a capacity to implement this and to make sure that the conversation is happening, the trust is built, and that what you do as a program to build capacity is going to be sustainable. And we saw recently that this capacity building is needed in all sectors. If you look at today's news with the Pegasus program, showing how a lot of vulnerable communities in the world were in fact in need of capacity building in order to defend themselves against a very high-end and very sophisticated attack by actors who have very different capabilities when it comes to attacking the one that have little capacity to defend. It gives you also the last part of the equation, I would say, is that capacity building is not happening in a vacuum. It's part of a wider ecosystem. So not only you have to look into the existing capacity of the beneficiary, but also the asymmetry in between the capacity of this beneficiary to defend themselves, to build up resilience, and the possibility for actors to attack them. So that's what we have in mind when looking at capacity building, and thank you for having us. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Duguin. I'd like to invite our next panelist, Mr. Kanwaljit Singh. Senior Program Officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Is he with us? I'm sure he'll be here shortly. Yes. Hello, Kanwal. I just introduced you, and you are free to speak.
Hello, thank you very much. Let me just go ahead and share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Yes. Can you see my screen?
No.
It is sharing at my end.
Yes, now we can see it. If we can just enlarge it or go into viewing mode.
Okay, Roy, there is a big time lag between when I speak and when I hear from the screen.
It's good. You can.
Okay, good. All right. So. Okay. Okay, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts here with this esteemed audience of world-leading experts. All lives have equal value. This is a core belief that drives our work all over the world. Although equality is a beautiful and elegant concept in mathematics, it is much harder to define and achieve in the real world. But try and try we must. The financial services for the poor team at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation strives to alleviate poverty and enhance women's economic empowerment through financial inclusion. But the reality is that 1 billion people in the world can't prove who they are and don't have a financial account. And 1.7 billion people don't have a financial account. Without these, they can't participate fully in government and society, capture the opportunities the world has to offer, assert their rights, or improve their lives. Our work in digital identity and payments aims to build equitable systems that can allow markets to serve the poor in sustainable ways. To achieve this, we see a digital financial services infrastructure stack as composed of 4 elements: phones and connectivity, digital payment platforms that are low cost, interoperable, real-time, and pro-poor, a unique digital identity that is inclusive, robust, secure, and safeguards privacy. And finally, data sharing that unlocks innovation and prevents exclusion of people based on unreliable trust mechanisms. Cybersecurity is a key thread that runs through this entire digital stack. So cybersecurity attacks leading to large financial organizations losing money, as in the Bank of Bangladesh case, losing data, as in the case of Equifax or Yahoo, or service availability losses such as those caused by WannaCry and NotPetya often make headline news. What doesn't get highlighted is that the cybersecurity context for poor people is equally, if not more, urgent. The unbanked are usually first-time digital users, often living in rural settings with low literacy and digital skills. They transact on low-cost mobile devices through new channels based on telco infrastructure and new fintech-based providers operating on new business models. This creates a unique cybersecurity threat model for financial inclusion, especially in low-income countries. So if we look at a business system-level perspective of cybersecurity in this environment, we see challenges for all stakeholders. The consumers lack cyber hygiene, the providers are struggling with costs, capacity, and capability issues, and the regulators are faced with the daunting task of regulating risk in a complex digital infrastructure environment where interconnectedness of digital systems is creating new risks new risk flows that very few people understand and even fewer can help address. Open source digital public goods is a new emerging paradigm to build trustworthy digital infrastructure for a fair and inclusive world. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has invested in the creation of MOSIP, an open source platform for foundational digital identity, and Mojaloop, an open source platform for mobile digital payments, to see if we can help build such trustworthy digital infrastructure that can be more inclusive. Cybersecurity capacity is a must-have condition for all countries that aspire to undergo a digital transformation, whether through this new emerging paradigm of open source digital infrastructure or even traditional channels as we have normally done. I leave you with this one final slide to highlight the complexity of the problem. We often talk about strategy, frameworks, standards, technology, and capacity without defining the context and applicability. While this may seem daunting at first, the optimist in me sees opportunities at every step of the way towards building a more secure world. There is an urgent need to build our capacity to address growing cyber risk. Otherwise, it threatens the very core of digital progress that underpins so many efforts aimed at improving lives by alleviating disease, hunger, and poverty. With that, happy to pause for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Although it was short, it was fascinating. We'll wait for questions after the panelists will be done talking. I'd like to invite the next panelist is Nicole Klicksen, who is a manager for digital transformation dealing with the African continent in the German GIZ. Is Nicole with us? Yes. It's a feature that, hi Nicole, it's a feature that only after I introduce the person, they appear somewhat confused. Can you hear us, Nicole?
Yes, I can hear you. Wonderful.
I just introduced you. Welcome. And please, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. So I start with a short presentation. It's really short. So my name is Nicole Klicksen. I have a private sector background with focus on ICT and digitalization. I'm now working for the GIZ since 2018, and since 2021, I'm also supporting GNet as a member of advisory board. And so GNet, for your information, is the academic research arm of the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism. It's industry-funded initiative founded by Facebook, Microsoft, Twitter, and YouTube, and GNet aims to better understand the ways in which terrorists use technology. GNet is supported by partners based around the globe. The research agenda is focused around the question, how do online violent extremists' behaviors and content related to offline real-world harms? My main job on the other side is working as country manager for digital transformation in Africa at GIZ. GIZ supports the German government in achieving its objectives in the field of international cooperation for sustainable development. The sole shareholder of GIZ is the Federal Republic of Germany. And to put it in another way, GIZ is a federal enterprise that supports change. And to achieve this sustainable change, we promote international education work and human capacity development. Just a few numbers. Today, GIZ has more than 23,000 employees. Almost 70% are national staff in the countries in which we operate. And we are operating as today worldwide in 120 countries. We have experience and skills in a wide variety of areas, and our work promotes social change processes, and our measures aim to enable people to achieve lasting results with their own system of reference. When we take a deeper look in my area on digital transformation in Africa, as of the first quarter of 2019, there were approximately 480 projects in 90 countries in this thematic area worldwide. 213 are centralized in Africa. People around the world are experiencing how digitalization creates new opportunities through profitable access to information, new products and services. The basis for this is reliable and secure infrastructure. However, it is becoming clear worldwide that the digital transformation and its application and tools bring new vulnerabilities and risks. And the digital and cyber security is increasingly becoming a prerequisite for a free and open internet, for the democratic constitution of states, for social, for economic and political participation, as well as for prosperous markets. And we see also backlogs in the development of cyber capacities, that these backlogs can expose poorer and disadvantaged countries and population groups in particular to cyber threats, and can limit or reverse their development. So many partner countries of us need support in the development of implementation of their own cybersecurity strategies and systems. And when we're working with partner countries, however, the German Development Corporation must be in mind that some states use the issue of cybersecurity to restrict the freedoms and rights of their citizens by means of censorship and repression. Strengthening and protecting cybersecurity is an important task for the future of German Development Corporation, since without it, the potential of digital change cannot be fully developed. We have a strategy paper on digitalization focused on data security and secure use of data in the global south. The capacities of our partner countries in the area of cybersecurity are also to be strengthened in the future, particularly in the context of good governance. We have also developed responsible data guidelines and signed the digital principles, which contain principles for working with data. And we think in human rights-based and human-centered approaches. So the issue of building cyber security capacities plays a central role in the German government's foreign cyber policy and cyber security policy. And to take a look in the future, at the moment, we are working on different projects. We are planning to integrate the expansion of cybersecurity capacities into the new digital development cooperation portfolio in Tunisia. Other examples of our work is to focus on consumer protection and cybersecurity financial service, and overall, of course, the strengthening human capacity development. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Pleasure to have you here with us. Last but not least, I'd like to invite our last panelist, Ms. Carrie Ann Barrett, Cybersecurity Policy Specialist from the Organization of American States. Let's await her appearance. Ms. Barrett, can you hear us?
I can hear you well, Roy.
Glad to have you here. I've just introduced you to our audience, and you are free to go ahead and take the floor.
Thank you so much, and thanks again for inviting the OAS for this presentation. I'll give everyone just a quick snapshot as to how we've been approaching cybersecurity capacity. I think all the speakers before gave an excellent overview. Just so everyone knows that the cybersecurity program at the Organization of American States was one of the first capacity building program in cybersecurity, and it's been around for over 15 years. One of the things that we recognize is that we can't do it what we do unless we have all the partnerships we do have, including governmental, institutional, even some of the speakers before IDB, World Bank. We all work, I think, pretty closely together to achieve each other's mandate. From our perspective, we approach capacity building from three main pillars. Policy development, recognizing that having a policy in place, whether it be a national cybersecurity strategy, a digital security policy, it all needs to have an umbrella, something that has some amount of directive. We also do research and awareness that includes our awareness raising campaigns or Twitter feeds in terms of just using social media as a tool to get the message out there. We actively participate with National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and that leads us into our capacity building generally, where we take it on various levels, which I'll go to in the next slide. So when we think about our technical projects under capacity building, we think about it from several angles. One is recognizing that incident response teams are critical to having some form of cyber defense in order to address any threats that may happen. We also recognize that information sharing is critical. So through our CSIRTs Americas network, we try to facilitate an exchange of operational information. We also have consolidated our incident response technical community, which is our CSIRTsamericas.org. And through that, we give various regional support as well to our member states within the Americas. If it is that, for example, they have an incident or they want to establish a CERT, we may give them technical advice and support. Even if one of the things that we recognize at the OAS, which is pretty critical, is coordination with other entities that are in the region. So for example, if ITU is developing a CERT in one of our member states, we would ensure that we give support to our member states to ensure that they absorb that capacity, because that's one of the key things that we recognize is the absorption rate in capacity building that's oftentimes misunderstood or overlooked. We also look at operational projects. We have online courses that we offer. We have a project with City Foundation called Creating a Cybersecurity Career Path, looking at youth in underserved communities that may not be thinking about digital security as a pathway to actually having a job. And we've been very, very successful with that, and even allowed some of them to be interning at our CSIRTsamericas.org network. We do Cyber Women Challenges with one of our trusted partners. And with that, we have reached, I think, over 1,500 women in terms of doing technical capacity building to build their skill set in real life scenarios. And we do just general cybersecurity training and exercises. Under policy development and research and awareness, we look at it from a strategic perspective, supporting national strategies, looking at sectoral cybersecurity frameworks, and also developing specific publications. For example, our partner IDB is on the call, and we've developed our OAS IDB cybersecurity report that's gone 2 years standing, and we believe that we'll be trying to develop a third one in the coming months. Looking at sectoral cybersecurity maturity assessments as well. We do national assessments for our member states to see where they are, where they could go, and to support them generally. From our perspective, looking at capacity building as a journey is critical, recognizing that each member state has very unique needs, which then builds into a more regional perspective in terms of what does the region need, and then how can we plug into the international market and what's happening there. One of the key things that we find is missing in terms of thinking about our regional challenges is that there's a lack of investment in cybersecurity education. When we talk about national building or national capacity building, we try to encourage our member states to prioritize cyber education in their national cybersecurity strategies. You have to be thinking about long-term investments, return on investment, and having a streamline of persons coming up from primary level that at the time of graduating at tertiary level, they can go straight into the cybersecurity field or cybersecurity sector is critical. Another challenge that we've identified in just absorbing all of this capacity building for cyber is the low level of cross-regional information sharing, which is why we had built out, our member states had agreed to build out the CSIRTs Americas network. And what we've been trying to encourage there, it's not just the OAS sharing threat intelligence to our member state, but also encouraging them to speak to each other through that network to at least be able to recognize what's happening. An old example, but a very good one in that is when we had the WannaCry incident, our member states actually developed scripts on their own to address the threat, and they actually were able to share it through the network with each other, which we support on 100%. Another key challenge that we wanted to flag for this group or this forum is the unavailability of scalable models for capacity building. oftentimes we have multiple projects going into the same country without any coordination. So what would happen is that because they're absorbing capacity from one donor, a development entity, a regional entity, or member states, and I think globally, there's the inability to actually scale up where they are and where they need to go and how they can absorb all of this assistance to have it as a scalable model for their own maturity. We think that's a huge challenge, and it's something as a global community we should raise even at this forum. And finally, the challenge I wanted to raise, just to pick everyone's brain on, is the existence of knowledgeable leaders on the real impact of cybersecurity at a strategic policy level. Many of the persons who hold these positions know that this is important. They know that cybersecurity is a real threat. But what the real impact of not having measures in place is, they often don't feel it. They may have one company impacted by ransomware, a second one by another threat, but the real impact on their national economic growth, which I think Ed earlier had spoken to in terms of the impact, is really, really critical. And I think, Roy, just on that note, I probably want to wrap up just to say that for us at the OAS, cybersecurity capacity building is something that does not end as a one-stop shop. It's something that has to be built on year in order to see real impact in the region and to see real growth. And I think I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you for those important remarks. I wrote a few things for sure for myself. Thank you for presenting the rich portfolio of the OAS in cybersecurity. Now we have a slight change in the timetable because of the technical delays we had. So we'll invite Dr. Tabansky to do his presentation now. And I'd like to request all of you to stay, and we'll see if we have time for some Q&A after that. So I'd like to invite Dr. Lior Tabansky, who is one of the most prominent researchers in the Tel Aviv University Cybersecurity Research Center. And he's been working on cyber capacity building models for the last few years, and will present some of the flagship work done by the Blavatnik Cyber Center. Lior, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Go ahead.
So, hello, thank you for staying then with us. So I'm happy to hear that all of the participants agree that we need cyber resilience if we are to proceed to achieving sustainable development goals and leveraging digital technologies. This is also has been clear to us for several years. And this is the reason that we at the Blavatnik Interdisciplinary Cyber Research Center are launching the new Regional Cyber Resilience Center. Tel Aviv University, as you perhaps know, is the largest Israeli public university. Our research center has been funding around 100 projects by now and working closely with practitioners, both from the public and the business sector. And we are ready to leverage this work to focus more efforts on delivering something applied and useful for the benefit of the people in the region on their journey to achieving sustainable development goals and digital transformation. I will now present the first mature output of the work. The work is developing and there will be other projects, but now I want to present the cyber capability maturity model. We call it promoting global cyber resilience of sectors. And the model is designed with three goals and design requirements. First, we want to be able to guide improvements, not only identify where gaps exist, but also identify ways, case-specific ways for the specific sector to gradually mature their cyber capability. In a small but important terminology issue, we are looking at capability rather than capacity, because we define capability as something that is required to achieve a particular set of goals, where capacity is a more general and perhaps holistic issue. So we're looking at capability, and another innovation is that we are able to analyze a sector rather than a national potential or a single firm organization. And I will run quickly through the three aims that we set and how we are about to achieve them. First of all, let's start with the sector. We understand that social and economic activity is a result of a complex social technical system. Cybersecurity, we continue to understand that it's not purely a technical issue. Obviously, it involves a lot of other non-technical aspects in social, human, political, economic, and other areas. And sector 2 is something that can be modeled through the application of the recent developments in system science. So we define sector as a coordinated group of organizations that provides a particular service in a region. This definition allows us both to transcend national borders and also to fit the level of analysis for the specific goal. For example, previously Kanwaljit talked about financial infrastructure in Africa, I suppose. So there you see that on the one hand, you have the telecommunication sector as being the infrastructure. And on the other hand, you have the more traditional financial service capabilities. You could say, or you could argue that these are two separate sectors, but this is no longer the case given the changes in technology and the business models. So we would be able to analyze simultaneously and in tandem both the telecommunications part and the financial services part, and streamline, overcome the gaps that exist between legacy definitions of different sectors. Now, how do we go about capturing a sector? We have designed the model and tested it, in which we have 4 dimensions of operations. The first one, the top one, is the key entities. For example, if you talk about the traditional financial services sector, these would be commercial banks, credit companies, and so on. And then you have the sector supervision. Again, a traditional example, these would be organizations such as ministries of finance or central banks and other regulatory authorities, consumer protections, and so on. So the first 2 represent the nodes on a graph or on a network. And then we can analyze the cyber capability maturity on the links between these nodes. The links, first of all, the business and functional links within the sector, but also external links, for example, with national law enforcement agencies or cybersecurity agencies or main customers and constituents and so on. On the vertical part, we have a number of 5 domains, practice domains, which correlate more or less to the NIST cybersecurity framework with some amendments. And performing an assessment in this matrix allows us to reach a rather granular assessment of the situation and represent it as a heat map of cyber capabilities. We do not intend to have a single score, but at least 20 different scores in different cross sections of this matrix. And from that point, we move on together with the clients to think about how to move ahead, which actions should be prioritized, and most importantly, which areas we can recommend not to invest in. We understand that the easiest thing would be to take a book of standards and throw it on someone's table and tell them do everything. But the goal here is to produce constructive and gradual improvement that results in endogenous capabilities and all of this as much as necessary for the achievement of the defined level of service in this particular sector. So the recommendations are beyond best practices and move ahead to case-specific settings and take them into account. So we think that this benefits the international development use cases because we are offering actionable progression paths, and we take into account and accept that the progress and process will take many years with different milestones, and this is a journey that will take a long time. And most importantly, that it has to be performed according to the local settings, capabilities, and requirements. This is not about copying someone else's model and trying to fit it. There is no such thing, no one-size-fits-all solution. So the granularity and the flexibility of the model, I think, is a unique advantage that can be leveraged in development scenarios. So I've talked about recommendations. Too many consulting engagements result with like generic recommendations saying that, well, we need to improve information sharing, for example, with whom, why, and so on. In the pilot the deployments that we have carried out, we were able to reach much more granular recommendations. For example, this includes things like who should take on specific roles and responsibilities within the specific sector, how to move ahead and collaborate with other areas of capacity in the sector or in the country, and then plan mid-term and even long-term milestones and performance indicators, and have them as a roadmap, or as we call it, a progression path for the sector to mature specific cyber capabilities. It does not go, of course, to the level of technical recommendations, but I think in our experience, it is a much more actionable set of guidance than previously available toolkits. So the whole process takes about at least 2 months, typically about 3. And the process is relatively lightweight. We do not use self-assessment questionnaires. We do not require to fill in a lot of paperwork. And there's also some additional innovations and methodologies, which I will later, of course, publish. And also intend to reach out to each one of you and your organizations and consult with you and pick your brain, so to speak, about how to move ahead with our regional cyber resilience center. It is important to note that we have already been working with the World Bank. Ed here on the call is our counterpart, and we are moving to leverage its capability for the diagnostic function in the World Bank, what is called the Critical Infrastructure Protection Toolkit. The second benefit area for the international development assessment use case is a broad fit. This is a supporting tool. I mean, again, we are here perhaps gathered a group of people who directly are interested in cyber capability as the main issue. In our approach, it's a supporting or an enabling capability for the development of both institutions and infrastructure, not necessarily in heavily digitalized areas, but also in more traditional ones, such as perhaps transportation or electricity and others. The sector architecture accommodates trans-border projects, which are common and in the development organizations. And it's applicable throughout the project lifecycle, from the requirement design stage to perhaps during the implementation or initial operation too. So this work has been already starting to be deployed. As I said, we try to create and demonstrate how we create improvements based on diagnostic of current capabilities and the required performance levels. Most of the recommendations are non-technical, but deal with other aspects of capability, including roles and responsibilities, governance, economic incentives, and so on. We focus on case-specific capabilities and the methodological innovation, which has shown great promise, is the sectoral approach, which integrates supply chain and third-party aspects and is able to incorporate external stakeholders and transcend borders. So this work has been rather promising for us. And as I said, this is just the first step of the new regional Cyber Resilience Center, which will be tasked to continue multilateral cooperation and expand it, and move ahead in moving from basic research perhaps to applied research, and being the hub of a public-private partnership, both within Israeli organizations and, of course, our esteemed international partners. So I hope that we will be able to discuss further. With your permission, we will reach out to you and set up dedicated discussions. For any inquiries and proposals, feel free to reach out to myself or to the other people on the call who organized it, including our government supporters. This is a truly public-private partnership where we have serious support from the government and also are able to leverage a lot of capabilities in the private sector. I hope you get my excitement about the project, and I'm looking forward to talking to you and your colleagues regarding this and moving ahead in solving the most challenging problems and achieving the sustainable development goals together. Thank you.
Thank you, Lior. Our time is almost run out, but I'd like to take the couple of minutes we have left to fire away on some 2 questions and basically let anyone who wants to comment on them or give other some sort of closing insight to give it. I wrote myself two issues as I heard the various presentation. One, there's also always the dilemma either to work bottom up or top down. Sometimes we understand the need for countries to build up and harness political commitment and formulate strategies and build institutions and lay down legal framework. But we also feel the very urgent need to do bottom-up tasks, training, setting up technical capabilities, giving them, putting them on the road, as to speak, and allowing countries to start doing cybersecurity in practice. How do you feel? How do we balance these two somewhat contrasting views? Secondly, I like to relate to something Ms. Barrett said about the need. Well, everyone said it in one sense or the other. The need to build scalable models to synchronize the diversified and decentralized efforts. Sometimes many of us do in the same countries or the same regions, and building more streamlined, effective models, making use of the small resources we have. Now, I think we all understand the need, but how do we move on about promoting it and making it happen? Feel free, anyone, to comment on these questions or any other insights.
So maybe I'll take the second question. That's what my organization, that's what the GFC was really stood up for, is to try to make more sense of this. So, when I was in the US government, I felt sometime that the same 3 people in the country were being trained by 12 different countries. And that's not very efficient given our limited resources. So the idea is to help coordinate those very strong efforts around the world. They're being done by many of the people on this call, many of the countries around the world, that we need to make that more effective and coordinated. And I think we've done that. I think it's gotten better, but we still need to make sure also that we're talking to the people who we give capacity building so they're getting what they actually need. They're not getting simply what we think they need, they're getting what they actually need. And I think that's an important part of this too.
Just to build on what Chris said, the OAS, even being the GFC hub for the Americas, what we've been trying to do under that hat and under our regional body hat is that even this year alone, we touched base with almost all our partners. We've had meetings with World Bank, ITU, everyone. So at least we're all on the same page in terms of what everybody is doing this year. And at least what we also do at the national level is that we speak to our governments to say, hey, you're going to have 10 people coming at you. You need to think about what each player is bringing to the table and coordinate at your national level, especially among your ministries. And we found that to be a little bit effective this year, and we're seeing our member states start to own the process a little bit more. But I think as a global community, we also need to think about it as to, do we have scalable models that we could give to them? That in addition to just saying to them that this is what your cybersecurity model or maturity should look like at each stage, but they themselves can start to assess what their skill sets are and what each of us right here on the screen can bring to them to allow them to build their capacity to move along the scale. And that's just one of the things that we've been trying to do this year, especially.
Thank you. Anybody else want to have some closing remarks?
Maybe just quickly on the topic of scalable tools. I think, the World Bank, we're engaged in developing these toolkits for our own use, but we think it would be ideal for, countries to be using similar types of tools and methodologies as they look at these types of risks, because it's very difficult, as we've seen, for countries to try to approach this. Everybody, to do their own thing, and everybody's coming up trying to reinvent the wheel. So I think there's definitely a need for more tools, more standardized tools and more standardized frameworks for how we approach and understand these risks.
Thank you. Okay. Let me first state that it was my pleasure to moderate this very important session. I enjoyed every presentation, and I'm sure our audience benefited as well. This discussion you can't finish it in 2 hours, you can't finish it in 4, but I think the major dilemmas of our age, of our time in capacity building cybersecurity has been demonstrated here. And the central theme is, of course, we need to keep discussing, we need to keep talking, we need to keep thinking and see how we can take this still embryonic field into being more effective, more mature, and moving faster and supercharged. So thank you very much. Thanks to our audience. And please enjoy the rest of Cyber Week. Plenty of more exciting sessions to come. Thank you. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.